Joke on me. My husband, Michael Reed, drowned unexpectedly, and the news struck me like a bolt of lightning from a clear sky. While sorting through his belongings, I accidentally found a copy of a property deed tucked inside a family magazine. Following the address written on it, I went to that house. The sight before me left me utterly stunned. The place was beautifully decorated, warm, romantic, filled with expensive furniture, soft carpets, and a crystal chandelier that still sparkled beneath a thin layer of dust. Compared to our old shabby apartment in the UB complex, it was like heaven and earth. On the walls hung photos of Michael with his first love, Grace Sanders, and their twin children. Every picture captured their once happy life together. On the desk, I found a hastily written farewell note that read, "Grace, since the day you passed away, my life has been a living hell. The pain is unbearable. Now that I've fulfilled my duty as a father and our children have grown into adults, I have nothing left to hold on to. I only wish to be reunited with you in the afterlife." Reading those words felt like being struck by lightning. I stood frozen in place, my body trembling. Then I stumbled out of the room, my heart consumed with rage and despair. At that moment, all I wanted was to rush to his grave and dig it up, just to release the hatred burning inside me. But anger overwhelmed me. My vision blurred, blood surged to my head, and I coughed up a mouthful of blood before everything went black and I collapsed backward. When I opened my eyes again, I was shocked to find that I had gone back in time to the 10th year of my marriage to Michael Reed. I was still at the office, working late to handle last-minute project changes from a demanding client. I was nearly 40, struggling with hormonal imbalance, exhausted, still hunched over my desk like an overworked ox at 10:00 at night. Bitterness filled every corner of my heart. Suddenly, my phone rang, breaking the silence. It was the police. They told me that they had found Michael's body in the West Hill Reservoir. At first, I thought it was a scam. "This is ridiculous. Go to hell, scammers," I shouted angrily. The officer on the other end didn't lose his temper. In a calm, professional tone, he recited his badge number and explained, "A man fishing at the reservoir discovered your husband's body. We found his ID on him. Please come to the scene immediately to assist with the investigation." Half in disbelief, I hung up and drove straight to West Hill Reservoir. On the way, I kept calling Michael, but his phone remained off. 40 minutes later, I arrived at the location the police had given me. The night was pitch black. The sound of flowing water and the cries of unseen animals filled the air, eerie and chilling. My legs trembled as I followed the faint glow of flashlights ahead. There, lying stiff and cold on the riverbank, was a man. He was wearing his usual white shirt and black slacks, now soaked and filthy. His shoes were gone, his bare feet were covered in cuts, and blood trickled from his eyes, ears, and nose. When I saw his face clearly, I froze as though lightning had struck me again. It was truly my husband, Michael Reed. After the scene investigation, the autopsy, and a review of the surveillance footage around the reservoir, the police ruled out foul play. The coroner found alcohol in his system, and the official conclusion was accidental drowning while intoxicated. When our twin children, Emily and Ethan, heard the news of their father's death, they rushed home from abroad. Overwhelmed with grief, I fainted several times as my blood pressure soared, and I was finally admitted to the ICU for emergency treatment. It was Emily and Ethan who handled all the funeral arrangements for their father. After I was discharged from the hospital, Michael Reed had already been buried. It wasn't until my children took me to visit his grave that I realized something shocking. They had buried Michael together with his first wife, Grace Sanders. But they had been divorced for more than 20 years. I turned to look at my children in disbelief. My daughter, Emily, spoke calmly. "That was Dad's wish." As she spoke, she took a document from her bag and handed it to me. "This is Dad's will. The lawyer gave it to us when my brother and I returned from abroad. You should take a look." My hands trembled as I accepted the document. Just as Emily had said, being buried with Grace Sanders was Michael Reed's personal request. Emily flipped to the last page and continued softly. "This part is about the distribution of assets. All of Dad's life insurance benefits go to me and Ethan. His funds and stocks were purchased before he married you, so they're considered his personal assets. He designated those to us as well. As for the old apartment, she paused briefly before going on, Dad left you the 50% of it that belongs to you, but for the other half, you'll need to compensate us at market value. Of course, you can also sell the apartment and split half of the proceeds with us. My son, Ethan, who had been silent the entire time, looked at me with a faint expression of guilt. His lips moved slightly as he said, "Emily and I got our green cards. Once everything is settled, we won't be coming back to the States. Please take care of yourself, Mom." I stared at the two children I had raised for 20 years, unable to believe what I was hearing. I didn't even notice when tears started streaming down my face. My throat tightened painfully, and when I finally spoke, my voice was hoarse and trembling. "How could you do this to me? I had been married to Michael Reed for 20 years. I became stepmother to Ethan and Emily when they were barely 5 years old. I loved my husband, stood by him through hardship, cared for his children as my own, treated his parents with respect, and gave everything I had to that family. Yet in the end, they all calculated against me, leaving me broken and empty. When I stumbled back home that day, I pushed open the door with all the strength I had left. Everything inside the house was still exactly the way Michael had left it. We had lived in that apartment for almost 20 years. We bought it during the second year of our marriage using the dowry money my parents had given me. It was a second-hand unit, over 30 years old, small and shabby, barely 800 square feet, once crammed with 5 people, including my mother-in-law. All these years, I had saved every penny for Ethan and Emily to study abroad and to pay for my mother-in-law's monthly dialysis treatments after she was diagnosed with chronic kidney failure. I kept telling myself that things would get better, that everything would work out in the end. But only now did I realize I had been nothing but a tool for their entire family to use. My mind went blank, like a stagnant pool of water. I moved mechanically, gathering Michael's belongings with empty eyes, preparing to throw them all away. When I opened his wardrobe, I found a stack of old clothes, and hidden underneath a worn-out family magazine. Inside it was a yellowed sheet of paper, a photocopy of a property deed. The owner's name read, Michael Reed. Following the address written on it, I went to the location. After verifying my ID, the locksmith helped me open the door. The moment I stepped inside, I was once again struck speechless by what I saw. The place was clearly Michael's secret home with Grace Sanders. The walls were covered with photos of the two of them and their twin children, pictures from when the kids were in elementary school, high school, and college. They had traveled all over the world together, visiting places I had always dreamed of but never dared to spend money on. The house was luxuriously and lovingly decorated, romantic, warm, filled with expensive furniture, thick carpets, and a sparkling crystal chandelier. It was a world apart from the shabby old UB apartment I had called home for most of my life. Compared to that old UB apartment, this house was like another world entirely. I forced myself to take a few shaky steps and pushed open the door to the master bedroom. The room was spacious, with a walk-in closet, a vanity, and a massive bed nearly 10 feet wide. Sunlight poured through the large bay window, bright and warm. The clothes in the closet were neatly arranged by category, and even at a glance, I could tell they were all expensive. Next to it was Michael Reed's study. The moment I stepped inside, it felt as if a blade had pierced straight through my heart. The walls were covered with photos capturing the happy moments of Michael, Grace Sanders, and their 2 children. A complete family, smiling in every picture. My knees gave out, and I sank into the chair at his desk. On the desk lay an open sheet of paper with a few lines of handwriting that read, "Grace, since you passed away 2 years ago, every day has felt like living in purgatory. The pain is unbearable. Now that my duties as a son are fulfilled and our children have grown, I have nothing left to hold on to. I only wish to meet you again in the afterlife." So it wasn't some drunken accident after all. He had taken his own life for love. A wave of madness crashed over me. I tore the letter into pieces with shaking hands, ripping it again and again until scraps covered the floor. I didn't know how long I stayed there. My body trembled as I pushed myself up, leaning against the desk for support, then stumbled out of the room. All I could think about was going to Michael's grave, to dig it up, to destroy everything, to vent the fury clawing at my chest. But rage consumed me. My chest burned as my blood surged out of control. I coughed up a mouthful of blood, my vision darkened, and I fell backward into nothingness. When I opened my eyes again, I was sitting at a large dining table overflowing with dishes. The room buzzed with noise, clinking glasses, laughter, cheerful conversation filling the air like a tide. It took me a moment to realize where I was. This was the celebration dinner after Ethan and Emily had finished their high school entrance exams. Both had been admitted to the city's best high school, tuition-free for 3 years, and each awarded a scholarship of 6,000 yuan. Michael was beaming with pride, moving from table to table with our children, toasting relatives and friends. Everyone praised him for being such a remarkable professor who had raised 2 outstanding children. Sitting beside my mother-in-law was Grace Sanders, smiling sweetly as she looked at Michael, Ethan, and Emily. Her expression soft and radiant, like the picture of a perfect family. I lifted my glass of red wine and downed it in one gulp. The cool, slightly bitter liquid slid down my throat, sharp and real. That pain reminded me I wasn't dreaming. Just as I was lost in thought, a sharp, mocking voice sounded beside me. "You're really lucky, you know that? After all the scandals about you back then, you still managed to marry such a good man. No uterus, no labor pains, and you got yourself 2 perfect kids for free. Some women have all the luck." I turned toward the voice. The speaker was Hannah Yu, a former junior from Michael's university days. She was now teaching at the same university as him, both in the philosophy department. Her voice was loud enough for half the room to hear. Several people glanced our way, eyebrows raised, lips curled, clearly waiting to see a scene unfold. Hannah smirked, tilting her head slightly. "Honestly, Lisa, you're blessed. I heard that 10 years ago you couldn't even get married, even when your family offered a whole apartment as dowry. Who could have imagined Michael would be so blind? With all those women chasing him, he picked you. Unbelievable." I looked at her face, twisted slightly with jealousy, and felt both amusement and pity. I'd heard that Hannah Yu had secretly loved Michael Reed for years, but her best friend, Grace Sanders, had beaten her to it. By the time Hannah found out, Grace was already 2 months pregnant, and their friendship ended right there. Later, heartbroken, Hannah married someone else. But not long after her marriage, Grace suddenly divorced Michael and moved abroad. Ever since then, Hannah had never gotten over the fact that she hadn't become Michael Reed's wife. That lingering resentment made her lash out at me whenever she could, deliberately pressing on old wounds just to see me flinch. There was a time when I used to feel ashamed of everything that had happened to me. I couldn't lift my head in front of others, so I kept quiet, swallowed every insult, and forced myself to smile. Those same cruel words had been said to me in my past life. And back then, I endured them. It was Ethan and Emily's celebration dinner, and there were teachers, classmates, and even some of Michael Reed's colleagues present. I didn't want to make a scene or embarrass anyone. I had kept silent for dignity's sake. But now, none of that mattered anymore. I slammed my chopsticks down on the table with a sharp crack and shouted, "Yes, I am that lucky. You're jealous that I married Michael Reed, aren't you? If you want my luck so badly, why don't I hand it over to you? Let you fulfill that pathetic crush you've been nursing for over a decade. Then maybe you'll stop prancing in front of me every few days, whispering how I don't deserve him." Hannah Yu's face went pale. She glanced nervously at her husband, who sat a few seats away. "Lisa, are you crazy? What nonsense are you talking about?" she stammered. I gave a cold laugh. "Nonsense? You really want to talk about nonsense? What about all those flirtatious texts you sent Michael? The way you cling to him with those pathetic, lovesick eyes every time you're near? You think I'm blind, and every time you just happen to bring up those disgusting things that happened to me in the past, just to humiliate me?" My voice shook, but I didn't stop. Yes, I was assaulted. Yes, I was beaten so badly that I lost my uterus. But even then, it was Michael Reed who insisted on marrying me. So if you can't stand that, go talk to him about it. The entire room turned to look at us. Hannah's husband's face darkened, his eyes burned into her. Across the room, Michael Reed pushed through the crowd, his expression furious. He glared at Hannah, then grabbed my arm, lowering his voice sharply. Do you know what day this is? There are family and friends here. Why are you bringing up things from the past? I yanked my arm free, my face hard as stone. What did I say? She's the one who started it. Don't tell me you didn't see that. Hannah's husband walked up to her, his expression grim. He grabbed her by the wrist, forcing her to stand, then gave Michael and me a strained smile. Lisa, Professor Reed, I'm so sorry. I just got an urgent call from work. We'll have to leave early. We'll visit another time. Without waiting for a response, he dragged Hannah out of the hall. The banquet hall fell into an awkward silence. The guests exchanged uneasy looks, unsure whether to speak. Then Grace Sanders, who had been sitting quietly before, stood up. She walked over to Michael's side, smiling softly at me, but in her eyes gleamed mockery and disdain. Her voice was smooth and gentle, but every word was sharp. Lisa, no one ever judged you for your past, but there's really no need to flaunt it in public. You're Michael's wife now. Don't you think you've embarrassed him enough? And think about Ethan and Emily. They still call you Mom. How are they supposed to face their classmates after this? Following her gaze, I turned toward Ethan and Emily. Ethan's fists were clenched, his eyes red with anger, while Emily's eyes were filled with tears and resentment. The look on their faces, disgust, shame, disappointment, stabbed through me like knives. Then I remembered that day at the cemetery, how they'd stood there with Michael's will in their hands, urging me to sell the house and give them half the money. The bitterness that rose in my chest made me sneer. Their real mother isn't dead, I said coldly. So tell me, how could I possibly be their mom? Maybe when their real mother dies, we can talk about it then. Grace's smile froze. Her face turned red with anger, and her wide eyes glistened as she glanced helplessly at Michael for support. His eyes darkened, a flicker of rage flashing across them. He reached out and grabbed my arm again, so tightly that I thought he might crush my bones. His voice was low and trembling with fury. Lisa, enough. Stop this right now before you humiliate us all. Whatever attitude you have, save it for when we get home. I lifted my eyes and stared straight at the man before me. A wave of overwhelming hatred surged through my chest. In that moment, it felt as if I had fallen back into my previous life, back to when I first discovered his betrayal and lies. The same searing pain ripped through me again, tearing at my heart. My voice was cold and sharp as I said, Michael Reed, do you really think you can keep deceiving me? I already know everything about you and Grace Sanders, about that house and that will. Did you both think you could trick me, strip me of everything, and leave me with nothing? Let me tell you, never. Michael's face went pale. He let go of my arm and stumbled back a few steps, looking at me as though he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. Grace froze, too, clearly not expecting me to fight back so fiercely. Around us, relatives and friends exchanged uneasy glances, uncertain what to say or do. I took a deep breath and continued firmly, Michael, I want a divorce. I can't stay in this house any longer. As for the division of assets, I'll have my lawyer handle it. I won't let any of you get away with what you've done. Without waiting for his response, I turned and walked out of the banquet hall, leaving behind a room full of stunned faces, and Michael Reed standing motionless, as if turned to stone. A few of his friends, seeing how tense things had become, rushed forward to smooth things over. Professor Reed, come on, one of them said with a forced laugh. You've got to teach us your secret to raising such smart kids. My son can't pass a single test. You've got to tell me how you talk to yours. Gradually, the chatter returned, and the banquet hall regained its noisy, cheerful atmosphere. I sat back down, my expression cold as I watched it all, a dull ache pressing against my chest. I poured myself another glass of red wine and drained it in one gulp. I knew perfectly well what I needed to do now. Divorce Michael Reed, leave that twisted family behind, and start my own life. But after being deceived for an entire lifetime, how could I simply let go of the hatred burning in my heart? When the dinner finally ended and the guests dispersed, only Michael, his mother, Grace, and their 2 children remained. The old woman's rough, grating voice broke the silence. Lisa, you might not care about your own dignity, but we still have ours. Did you really have to air all that filthy nonsense from before you got married, right in front of everyone? Do you think those things are something to be proud of with your reputation and the fact that you can't even bear children? Even if you were never married before, I wouldn't have let my son marry damaged goods like you. You're not worthy of our family or of Michael. Enough. Michael barked, his voice rising. I told you not to bring up the past again. Why can't you just stop? I looked at his mother, strong and healthy at this stage, before her diagnosis of chronic kidney failure. Back then, she didn't need to play nice, didn't need to flatter me, so I'd spend my money and time taking her to dialysis every weekend. In my previous life, after her diagnosis, I had cared for her for nearly 8 years, every single Saturday without fail. I'd drive her to the hospital, sit with her through her treatments, and prepare special meals with low protein, low salt, and reduced phosphorus and potassium. She died peacefully in the hospital 2 months before Michael took his own life. That was the filial duty fulfilled he mentioned in his suicide note. That was my doing. A bitter laugh escaped my lips as I said, if it weren't for the injuries I suffered and the surgery that took my uterus, do you really think I would have even looked at Michael Reed? Do you think your son is some kind of prize? Even his so-called professor title was handed to him on a silver platter. If my father hadn't spent months running around begging his colleagues for recommendations, he'd still be stuck as a low-level lecturer. I took a step forward, my tone icy and cutting. So, stop pretending to be righteous when all of you are nothing but hypocrites. The moment my words fell, the entire room went dead silent. For a second, even the air felt frozen. Michael's mother stared at me, her face drained of color, her body trembling uncontrollably. She clearly hadn't expected me to throw those words right in her face. Anger twisted her features until her lips quivered and her breath came out in sharp, uneven bursts. Michael Reed flinched as my words hit their mark. His face twisted in anger as he shouted, "What the hell is wrong with you tonight? Did you take gunpowder for dinner? All this just because Hannah said a few things to you? Was that worth losing your mind over?" Then Emily raised her voice, her tone sharp and trembling with fury. "This is supposed to be mine and Ethan's graduation dinner. Why did you have to talk about that disgusting stuff? About how you were assaulted? How am I supposed to face my classmates now? Why do you always have to ruin everything for everyone?" I took a long, shaky breath, holding back the fire that threatened to burst out of me. "Yeah," I said coldly, "I must have swallowed gunpowder tonight. So, what are you going to do about it?" Then I turned to Emily, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "And whether or not you can face your classmates has nothing to do with me. Honestly, I'm surprised you're not the one embarrassed, being short, ugly, and walking around with your nose in the air. I'm the one who should be ashamed to be seen with you." The truth was, Emily really wasn't much to look at. Though she and Ethan were twins, Ethan had inherited his mother Grace's delicate features, tall, handsome, and graceful. But Emily looked exactly like her grandmother, right down to the round face and heavy jawline. For a moment, Emily froze, stunned into silence. Then her face crumpled and she burst into tears. Crying hysterically, she ran out of the banquet hall on her short legs, her sobs echoing down the corridor. I no longer had the patience to argue with any of them. I grabbed my bag, stood up, and walked out of the hotel without looking back. Outside, the sky had turned completely dark. The summer night air was cool, yet the breeze that brushed my face felt sticky and heavy. I kicked at a few pebbles as I walked, my thoughts tangled and restless. Memories of the past resurfaced, choking me like water filling my lungs. I had been assaulted once. It happened during my senior year of college when I was interning. I was walking home after a late shift one night when a man followed me into a dark alley. The neighborhood wasn't nearly as safe back then. Many alleys didn't even have surveillance cameras. He grabbed me, covering my mouth and nose. I fought with everything I had, scratching, kicking, clawing. In the struggle, I managed to land a hard kick between his legs. That one kick enraged him. He threw me violently to the ground. He tried twice but couldn't do anything. His body failed him and his frustration exploded. Cursing furiously, he yanked up his pants and kicked me in the stomach again and again before tossing me aside like garbage next to a trash bin. My parents searched for me the entire night. When the doctor told them my uterus had been severely ruptured and my bladder damaged, and that the only way to save my life was to remove my uterus completely, my mother fainted on the spot. My father's hair turned white overnight. The man was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but the damage he caused me was beyond repair. I had to wear a catheter bag for 3 months and spent an entire year in therapy before I could even begin to function again. After that, I became withdrawn, insecure, disgusted with myself. I couldn't fall in love. I didn't think I was worthy of anyone. Then I met Michael Reed. He was like a ray of light piercing through the darkness that had consumed my life. I thought he was my salvation, my guiding star. I gave him everything. I loved him with all I had. Even when my mother-in-law was cruel to me, even when Ethan and Emily, influenced by her and by their mother Grace Sanders, resented me and treated me coldly, I still cherished that marriage. I believed in it. I believed in him. But what I never imagined was that the man who once shone like light was in truth the devil hiding behind it. The hand that dragged me back into hell. He destroyed me completely, turning every trace of love and warmth I had ever felt into a blade that cut me to pieces. By the time I got home, it was nearly midnight. The house was dark and silent. They must have already gone to bed. But as I passed the living room, I heard a faint rustling from the balcony. In the stillness of the night, the sound was unnervingly eerie. I turned on the light and walked toward the source. On the balcony sat a narrow bamboo basket, its opening wrapped in a mesh bag. The faint noise came from inside. The sight sent a chill down my spine. My body stiffened, goosebumps covering my arms. The basket was writhing ever so slightly. Inside it was a nest of poisonous snakes. In my previous life, after Ethan and Emily's exam results came out, my mother-in-law insisted it was the blessing of the Buddha she worshipped. Somehow, she had gotten her hands on over a dozen venomous snakes and planned to take the children up the mountain to set them free. When I found out, I tried again and again to stop her. I told her if she really wanted to do a good deed, she could release some carp instead, but she refused, saying, "Once you release an animal, you can't eat it again." I still want to eat fish, but I'd never eat snakes. No matter how I tried to reason with her, she wouldn't listen. So, one morning, while she was out for her walk, I secretly took that bamboo basket full of snakes to the local wildlife rescue center. When the staff untied the mesh bag and saw what was inside, they were horrified. It was packed with deadly silver-banded krites. Because the species is nationally protected, they immediately called the police. I was held for over an hour while the officers lectured me and made me write a statement promising never again to buy or sell wild animals illegally before they let me go. My mother-in-law threw a fit when she found out, screaming that I had ruined her spiritual cultivation. I shut the door in her face and walked away. This time, I decided not to interfere. The next morning, she came back from buying breakfast and shouted toward the living room, "Michael, go wake Ethan and Emily. They need to eat before I take them up the mountain to release the snakes." Michael rubbed his temples, his patience thinning. "Mom, stop dragging the kids into those superstitious things," he said irritably. She glared at him. "What do you know? If it hadn't been for my prayers to Buddha, do you think you'd have gotten into college? Do you think your kids would have done so well on their exams? That's all thanks to the Buddha's blessing." Seeing that arguing with her was pointless, Michael frowned but said nothing more. He turned to knock on Ethan and Emily's door. When the two came out after washing up and sat down at the dining table, my mother-in-law began unpacking breakfast, handing portions to everyone but me. I didn't care. I went back to my room, grabbed the folder I'd prepared with my ID card, marriage certificate, and household registration, and slammed the door behind me. I took a cab straight to the property registration office. Just as I expected, under Michael Reed's name was a registered property, an apartment of about 2,500 square feet, registered 3 years ago. That was the same year Grace Sanders returned from abroad. The mortgage had been fully paid off just 2 months earlier. I asked the clerk to stamp the verification form and left. On my way to work, I couldn't stop thinking about it. A man as cautious and calculating as Michael, would he really leave a property under his own name by accident? What I had seen before was only a photocopy of the deed. He had always made sure that even his insurance policies listed only his children, Ethan and Emily, as beneficiaries. When we bought our first apartment together, he had already schemed to make sure I got the smaller share. So, with this newer property worth 6 or 7 million yuan, there was no way he'd willingly let me get half. Just as I finished the weekly meeting at work, the landline on my desk rang. I pressed the speaker button. A panicked voice burst out, Ethan, crying and gasping for air. Mom, please come quickly. Grandma got bitten by a snake while we were releasing them. She's in so much pain. She passed out. I can't move her. We're on the southern hill, halfway up the mountain. You know it, the place where we had that picnic last time. There's a huge rock here. Dad's phone isn't working, Mom. I'm scared. The snakes are everywhere. They're crawling all over. Please, come help us. Go away. Don't crawl over here. Ah. His terrified screams filled the room, his voice breaking between sobs. Mom, can you hear me? Please come. Please hurry. I automatically picked up my cell phone, ready to dial 911. But just as my finger hovered over the call button, I stopped. My hand froze midair. Then quietly, I set the phone down. If the Buddha my mother-in-law worshipped could bless her grandchildren with good exam results, then surely he could also keep them safe. That was the thought that crossed my mind as I picked up the phone and said calmly, Ethan, honey, your mom is still out of town. Try calling your dad again or dial 911 for help. There was silence on the other end for about 3 seconds before his trembling voice came back. Mom, I called your office landline. What are you talking about? I lowered my voice. I told you I'm heading out of town for work. The cab's already waiting downstairs. I don't have time to explain. Before he could answer, I hung up. Then I powered off my phone. My mother-in-law had been bitten several times by the silver-banded krites. Ethan was bitten twice on his left calf. Emily, who had been home with cramps from her period that day, was spared by sheer luck. Because they were halfway up the mountain and the forested area was so large, it took rescuers over 3 hours to reach them after the emergency call. By then, both victims were barely clinging to life. After hours of intensive treatment, their lives were saved, but just barely. My mother-in-law's condition was critical. The venom had caused her entire body to convulse and foam at the mouth. The skin around the bite marks had already turned black and necrotic. The doctor warned that this was only the beginning. Her muscles in those areas would likely die completely, and she would probably never walk again. As for Ethan, his leg had gone numb and the muscles were weak. But that wasn't the worst part. The doctor explained that the krite's venom attacks the nervous system, leading to long-term complications such as memory loss, poor concentration, insomnia, and potential irreversible damage to internal organs. For a student about to start high school, it was devastating. I didn't show up at the hospital until the 3rd day after the incident. Since I had lied about being on a business trip, I had to play the role to the end. When Michael Reed saw me, his face turned crimson with rage. Where the hell have you been these past few days? Why didn't you answer your phone? Ethan was bitten by a snake. He was calling you. Why didn't you go help them? If you just brought the rescue team in time, if they'd gotten the serum sooner, none of this would have been so serious. I looked at the two of them lying in their hospital beds, one half conscious, the other staring blankly at the ceiling. My voice trembled with just the right amount of hurt and exhaustion. The company sent me out of town at the last minute. As soon as I got there, my phone was stolen. How was I supposed to know what happened at home? Then I turned the question on him, sharp and accusing. Wait. When I told Ethan to call you, didn't he? Why didn't you go right away? What kind of father does that make you? Michael froze. The fury in his eyes dimmed slightly, replaced with unease. I pressed on, my tone rising with anger. They're your mother and your son. How could you be so cold, so heartless? And now you have the nerve to blame me for it. Tell me, what were you doing that was so important you couldn't go save them yourself? For a brief second, guilt flashed across his eyes. His voice softened, almost defensive. I didn't mean to blame you. I was just worried. You disappeared for 3 days without a word. I was anxious, that's all. But what's done is done. Talking about it now won't change anything. He exhaled and rubbed his forehead. Stay here and look after Mom and Ethan. I'll go home, change clothes, and bring some things. I shook my head firmly. No, I have a ton of work waiting at the office. I need to go back soon. Just hire a nurse here at the hospital. I'll cover the cost. His jaw tightened, teeth grinding audibly, but in the end, he nodded. Ethan was discharged before his grandmother, but he wasn't the same. The doctor said it was post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Ethan often woke up in the middle of the night screaming from nightmares. He couldn't even walk past areas with thick greenery anymore. Sometimes the mere sound of leaves rustling in the wind made him cover his ears and cry out in terror. Watching him like that filled my heart with a mix of bitterness, pity, and pain. There was a time when I truly loved those 2 children as if they were my own. I had cared for Ethan and Emily with every bit of my heart. But now, seeing him in this state, all I could think was, if anyone was to blame, it was the Buddha his grandmother worshipped, the one who'd failed to protect him. By mid-July, it was time for high school registration. But given Ethan's condition, there was no way he could attend. I went to the school and filed an official leave of absence on his behalf. Because he had scored so well on his entrance exams, the school principal approved it immediately. When I handed Ethan the official notice of his leave, he broke down crying, covering his face with his hands. Maybe, deep down, he already knew this temporary break was only an illusion. He would never set foot in that high school again. I sighed silently to myself. That was the last thing I could do for him. Soon after, I listed our old apartment with a real estate agency. The place was old and small, but the school district was good, so it could still sell for around $50,000 or $60,000. I had already chosen the buyer. It would be sold privately for $30,000. The day before my mother-in-law was to be discharged from the hospital, I checked into the same hospital as a patient myself. When I asked Michael Reed for money to pay the deposit, he snapped, "Do you have to get admitted now? Who's going to look after my mom when she gets out?" I looked at him calmly, his face red with anger, and handed him the hospital admission slip. They found a nodule in my lung. The doctor recommends immediate surgery. It's not large, but it's pressing against my trachea, which is why I've been coughing so much. The doctor said it's better to remove it early. In my previous life, I had the surgery 3 months later. This time, I decided to do it ahead of schedule, on purpose. Michael gripped the paper tightly, taking several deep breaths, his jaw clenched as though he might explode. But in the end, he forced himself to stay calm, keeping up the image of a caring husband. He took out his bank card and handed it to me. I called my cousin, who was home from college for the summer, and asked her to stay with me in the hospital for a few days. The day after my surgery, around noon, while my cousin went downstairs for lunch, Michael came into my ward. He pulled out several documents and asked me to sign them. I was still weak from anesthesia and fasting, barely able to sit up. But he was insistent, urging me to hurry. He said, "It's nothing serious. A friend of mine lost his job and is selling insurance now." I told him we'd help out by buying a few short-term policies under our names to boost his numbers. It's cheap, just $100 or so per policy for a year. I just need your signature at the bottom. He'll handle the rest. As he spoke, he placed a pen in my hand and almost casually pulled out his phone, ready to record. At that exact moment, my cousin returned, having come back to grab her phone. She froze when she saw Michael hovering over me with papers. "Brother-in-law," she said sharply, "what's so urgent that you have to make her sign something right after surgery? Look at her. She's dizzy and weak. Can she even see what she's signing? Let me take a look first." As she reached for the papers, Michael quickly gathered them all up and shoved them into his bag, forcing a strained smile. "Oh, look at me. I wasn't thinking. I forgot your cousin just had surgery. I was only trying to help a friend with his insurance quota. She can sign later, once she's feeling better." My cousin narrowed her eyes, her voice dripping with suspicion. You're not sneaking in some kind of loan document or something shady for her to sign, are you? It was clearly meant as a joke, but Michael's face changed instantly. The mask of gentleness and composure he always wore cracked. He glared at her, his tone suddenly harsh. What nonsense are you talking about? He snapped. So much for being a college student, Michael Reed snapped. You really have no manners. Then he turned and hurried out of the hospital room without another word. My cousin looked stunned and hurt. I picked up her phone from the bedside table and handed it back to her, offering an apologetic smile. Don't mind him, I said softly. Go grab some lunch downstairs. He's not worth your anger. Still fuming, she pouted and left the room. The next morning, during rounds, the doctor told me that a little movement would help my digestion recover. My cousin borrowed a wheelchair and suggested we take a short walk in the small hospital garden, since the morning air was cool and pleasant. She helped me walk slowly for about 10 minutes before we grew tired and sat down on a bench behind an artificial rock hill to rest. That was when I heard a familiar voice. I told you I'd come by tonight. What are you doing here this early? I turned my head toward the sound. There stood Michael, holding a thermos in one hand and wrapping the other around Grace Sanders' waist. His face showed helpless affection, a doting smile playing on his lips. I pressed my index finger to my lips and signaled for my cousin to stay quiet. Then I leaned slightly behind the rock, hiding myself from sight. Grace's voice came out soft and petulant. I just couldn't stand it when I thought about that chicken soup you spent 2 hours making for her. How could you treat that woman so well? She doesn't deserve it. Michael chuckled and sighed. Grace, you're 40 years old now. Why are you still jealous like a little girl? Every time I go to your place, who's the one cooking and making soup? It's always you. Now she's sick and I just brought her food twice. You don't want her to die, do you? If she's gone, who's going to take care of my mom, do the chores and look after the kids? Then he lowered his voice slightly. Or, if you want, we can remarry. I'll tell her to get out immediately. Grace laughed coldly. I'm not that stupid. I'm perfectly happy being free of that burden. I handed the kids over to her and you handle all the money, the chores, the parenting. Even a nanny or tutor wouldn't be as devoted as you. Why would I give that up? Being the one who benefits for free is much easier. She smirked. And your mother, with her temper, who could stand her? Now that she's half paralyzed, I'd be the one stuck taking care of her. No, thanks. I like things just the way they are. No responsibilities, no strings. Then, with a teasing smile, she added, by the way, about that property transfer agreement you mentioned, the one where you were going to trick her into signing the house over to me. Did she sign it yet? Michael's voice darkened. No. That damn cousin of hers ruined it. I almost had her. It would have worked if not for that girl. Grace waved her hand dismissively. So what? It's not a big deal if she doesn't sign it herself. But if she finds out later and sues, it'll be a problem. That's a loophole, you know. I'll find another way, he muttered. Grace gave a slow, amused smile. I'm not worried. Professor Reed always gets things done. I'll wait. With that, she reached for the thermos in his hand. Let me at least taste this famous chicken soup you made. I haven't eaten breakfast yet. Michael hesitated but eventually unscrewed the lid for her. Grace lifted the thermos, sniffed it and took a small sip, only to immediately spit it back in. Ugh, she grimaced, wiping her mouth. It's so bland and greasy. It's awful. She handed the lid back to him and sneered. I'll pass on this disgusting soup. You'd better save it for your good wife upstairs. Michael took out a tissue and gently wiped her lips. She just had surgery, so the food needs to be light. I didn't add any salt. The chicken must have been too fatty. I'll make another one tonight for you, okay? Wait for me downstairs. I'll take this up to her, then drive you home later. With that, the two of them linked arms and started walking toward the inpatient building, their laughter echoing through the garden. My cousin stood frozen beside me, completely stunned. When Michael turned around and saw me, my face was streaked with tears. His grip on my wrist was so tight that it hurt, but I forced a faint smile at him. The sight of it made tears stream down his face uncontrollably. His eyes were bloodshot as he choked out, "I want to kill those two bastards for you." I gently patted the back of his hand, comforting him softly. "Killing them would be too easy. I want them to live and suffer." After I was discharged from the hospital, I found out that Michael Reed had sent his mother to a rehabilitation center for recovery. He said he was just waiting for me to get better before bringing her back, so I could take care of her again. How considerate of him. Not long after, the real estate agent called to tell me that there was finally a buyer for the apartment. When Michael found out I was selling the house, his face turned pale. "Are you crazy?" he yelled. "If you sell this place, where are we supposed to live?" I smiled faintly. "I'm planning to buy a bigger house. It's too cramped for all of us here." He frowned, his tone tense. "We don't have the money to buy another house. My mom's medical bills, Ethan's rehab, everything costs money. This apartment might be old, but the location's great. The hospital's nearby and we don't even need to drive. It's convenient." I looked at him meaningfully. "Sure, I don't have money. But you do, don't you? You've been a tenured professor for years now, making over $200,000 a year. I've been covering most of the household expenses all this time. Don't tell me you've got nothing saved." He stiffened slightly, trying to look composed. "I have some savings, but most of it's tied up in stocks and funds. It's not like I can cash that out immediately." Hearing him mention investments, I decided to press further. "If all your money's in stocks and funds, then I need to review the details. Those investments are part of our shared marital assets. I need to make sure the amounts match your income over the years." Of course, Michael Reed had no intention of letting me see any of his investment records. His money had long been funneled elsewhere, into property, no doubt. And even if there were investments, he'd never planned to share them with me. But that was fine. I had my own plan. I made a call to my lawyer, asking him to come over and help us notarize everything. I asked Michael to confirm in writing that as of that day, all of his investments were marital property. He hesitated, scowling. "Lisa, what the hell is this supposed to mean? You don't trust me?" I smiled calmly and shook my head. "Of course I do. But if your investments were made with income earned during our marriage, then legally they're joint assets. Today's notarization is just a formality, unless you're hiding something." "Of course not," he snapped. "Then why won't you sign?" I asked quietly. He froze, momentarily speechless. When it became clear he still wouldn't put pen to paper, I turned to the lawyer. "If my husband is secretly transferring assets, how can I legally find out where the money's going?" Michael flinched. The pen slipped from his hand and clattered onto the floor. The lawyer, catching on instantly, replied matter-of-factly, "You can apply for a court investigation order. Once it's approved, I can help you trace all of his bank accounts and financial holdings, including stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. It's a complicated process and takes time, but it's standard procedure when dividing property during a divorce." Before the lawyer could finish speaking, Michael had already grabbed the papers, scrawled his signature, pressed his thumbprint and shoved the signed agreement toward me. I took it with a composed smile while the lawyer recorded everything on video for evidence. Compared to the monthly transfers he had been sending Grace Sanders, sacrificing half of his so-called investments was probably a small price to pay. A month later, the apartment was finally sold for exactly $30,000. The buyer was a friend I had arranged in advance. When Michael Reed found out, he was in disbelief. He called the agent several times to confirm, and each time the agent patiently explained, "Yes, it's a school district property, but both the elementary and middle schools are moving to new campuses. Within 3 years, all the schools in this area will relocate. This place will basically turn into an urban slum." Of course, Michael wasn't stupid. He glared at the agent and snapped, "Forget it. The house isn't for sale." The agent calmly pulled out the signed contract with both our names on it. "I'm afraid that's not possible. You've already signed the sale agreement. If you breach the contract, you'll owe the buyer 20% of the sale price as a penalty." I smiled faintly and cut in. "Let it go. Selling it for $30,000 is already lucky. Look at Mrs. Jean next door. Her place is over 100 square meters and only sold for $38,000. Once the schools move out, no one will want to buy these old units. Then, as if to make my argument more convincing, I added, my dad heard we're changing houses. He said he'd help us with $50,000. So let's sell it quickly. The truth was, Mrs. Jean's place really did sell for $38,000. But that was because she had already bought a new apartment and gave her old one to her sister-in-law. When I mentioned my father's offer, Michael fell silent. The day the $30,000 was transferred into my account, I dumped every cent into the stock market. I went long while my friend on the other end went short. The money was destined to vanish, a total loss, exactly as I intended. After the sale was finalized, I contacted a moving company and told them to relocate everything from our home to Grace Sanders' apartment. As we arrived, Ethan followed behind me nervously. When he saw the address, his face turned white. It was his biological mother's home. He looked so ashamed he could barely lift his head. I smiled coldly. You should be familiar with this place. I'm sure you even have your own room inside. His face flushed deep red as he rubbed his hands together, fidgeting anxiously. He knocked on the door, but no one answered. Right in front of him, I called the police and then a locksmith. I'm reporting a case of illegal occupation. I told the officers calmly. Someone has taken over my property and changed the locks. I handed over my identification, the property deed, and the official verification from the housing authority. With the locksmith's help, the door was soon open. When Grace Sanders returned, her arms full of shopping bags, the movers had already finished unloading everything inside. She threw her bags on the ground and screamed at me, "Get out. This is my house. Michael bought this place for me. It has nothing to do with you." I pulled out our marriage certificate and waved it in front of her face. This property was purchased during our marriage. It's legally shared between me and Michael Reed. The one who should get out is you. The police confirmed my statement on the spot. "Ma'am," one of them said to Grace, "this property is registered under Mr. Reed's name, but it is marital property. You have no right to occupy it. You must vacate immediately. If she presses charges, you'll also be liable for financial damages." Grace stood there frozen, tears streaming down her cheeks. Then she fumbled for her phone and tried to call Michael, begging him to come fix the situation. I sneered. "Michael can't help you now. He's got bigger problems." 2 days earlier, I had sent all the evidence the private investigator collected, photos, messages, hotel receipts, straight to the disciplinary committee at his university and the local education board. He was probably sitting in a conference room right now being questioned about his unprofessional conduct. When Michael came home that evening, he already knew what had happened. But instead of exploding in anger, he dropped to one knee in front of me, voice trembling, begging for forgiveness. He claimed he had only lent the house to Grace temporarily, that he was afraid I'd misunderstand, so he hadn't told me. After a long, pitiful monologue, he finally said, "Please, Lisa, go talk to your father. See if he can pull some strings and smooth things over. If this gets out, my career will be finished. I swear I'll end things with Grace completely." He promised that from now on he would dedicate himself completely to me, that he'd live an honest life and make up for everything he'd done. I stood over him the entire time, looking down, saying nothing. Improper conduct was nothing. It was just the beginning. A much bigger storm was about to break over his head. Using the excuse that I needed to talk to my father to help him pull some strings, I moved back into my parents' house. Truthfully, I just didn't want to stay under the same roof with him anymore. I knew that once the next wave of consequences hit, Michael Reed might lose control, and I didn't intend to give him a chance to hurt me. A few weeks earlier, I had accidentally stumbled upon one of Michael's old laptops, a model he'd stopped using years ago. Curious to see if there was anything useful inside, I spent a little over $200 to get it repaired. When I opened the files, I was stunned. Hidden in that old computer was undeniable proof that his PhD dissertation had been plagiarized. Nearly 30% of his published paper was directly translated or copied from another scholar's work abroad. The arguments, the logic, even the structure were almost identical. And the source, the original foreign paper, was still saved on that very same hard drive. I gathered all the evidence and sent it to the academic journal where his dissertation had been published, reporting Michael Reed for academic fraud. Within days, the journal publicly issued an official retraction of his paper. They deleted his work from their database and permanently blacklisted him from ever submitting again. They also forwarded all evidence of his misconduct to his university. The school wasted no time. They formed an investigation committee and launched a full inquiry. But what shocked me most was what came next. Helen Moore, yes, that same former colleague of his, filed a formal complaint under her real name, accusing Michael of stealing her research results and selling her co-authorship rights for profit. She claimed that during grant applications, he had falsified budget reports and pocketed the excess funds. It wasn't until later that I learned why Helen had finally turned on him so ruthlessly. After that dinner party months ago, her husband had confronted her about all the rumors he'd heard and demanded a divorce. No amount of begging or tears could change his mind. Heartbroken and humiliated, Helen went out drinking and by sheer coincidence ran into Michael Reed and Grace Sanders at a bar, kissing passionately in a dark corner. In a rage, she stormed over and attacked Grace, clawing at her hair. But Michael had pulled her away and slapped her across the face in public. That slap must have shattered whatever illusions she still had about him. Only then did Helen realize that for years she'd been nothing but a fool, used, manipulated, and discarded. Worse, she had willingly handed over her research findings to him. So she struck back the only way she could, by exposing everything. With everyone else moving against him, I decided it was time to strike, too. I filed a lawsuit against Michael Reed for bigamy and for concealing and transferring marital assets. But after 2 court summons, he avoided both hearings, citing urgent matters. The case was postponed indefinitely. Around that time, Emily, still unaware of what was really happening, called me angrily to demand her living expenses. "How many times do I have to text you for money? Are you ignoring me on purpose?" I didn't even bother arguing. I hung up and in one swift motion blocked all her contacts. 2 months later, after the university's investigation concluded, Michael's professor title was revoked. Due to academic fraud and moral misconduct, he was stripped of all faculty positions and his employment contract was terminated. He was also ordered to repay every cent of the embezzled grant funds and bonuses. The day after his dismissal, I received a call from the rehabilitation center. His mother had suffered sudden respiratory failure. By the time they tried to get her to the hospital, it was too late. She was gone. I notified Michael about his mother's death. There was only silence on the other end of the line, a long, hollow silence. I didn't attend the funeral. I told them I wasn't feeling well. Their family's affairs no longer had anything to do with me. That night, while I was working late at the office, my phone rang again. It was the police. They told me Michael Reed had fallen into the West Hill Reservoir. Luckily, a man fishing nearby saw it happen and pulled him out before calling an ambulance. He was taken to City General Hospital, and I went there immediately. Michael Reed was no longer in critical condition, but his thigh had been slashed open by something sharp underwater. Because he'd been submerged for too long, the wound was badly infected. The doctor presented me with 3 possible treatment plans and was about to explain each in detail when I interrupted. "Just tell me, which one costs the least?" He hesitated for a moment before replying cautiously. "The least expensive option is amputation." "Then amputate it," I said flatly, without a second of hesitation. The doctor blinked in surprise. "There are other options," he said quickly. "We could try vascular reconstruction or even a graft. There's still a chance to save the leg. He's not even 40. He's young. Just amputate," I repeated firmly. "I don't have money for those fancy procedures." "Where's the consent form?" The doctor looked at me for a long moment, then silently handed over the paperwork. I signed it in bold, steady strokes. Why wouldn't I? We were still legally married. Every dollar he spent in medical bills would come half out of my pocket. Of course I was going to choose the cheapest option. When Michael finally woke up after surgery, he was dazed and disoriented, trapped somewhere between this life and the last. I picked up his phone and dialed Grace Sanders' number. He stared at me like a fool until her tearful voice came through the receiver. "Michael, where have you been these days? I've been calling nonstop. Your phone's always off. And look at Ethan. His homeroom teacher says he's distracted and probably dating someone at school. His mental state isn't good and I'm falling apart. What am I supposed to do?" The moment Michael heard her voice, his entire body started trembling. "Grace, you're alive?" he stammered, eyes wide with disbelief. "Didn't you die 2 years ago of pancreatic cancer?" He turned toward me as if seeking confirmation. Grace's voice rose, confused and impatient. "What are you talking about? I'm perfectly fine. Who said I had cancer? Michael, what's wrong with you? And what's this about Ethan? Did something happen while they were overseas? Were they bullied?" Then her tone shifted, sharp and annoyed. "You must have lost your mind. Don't you remember? Your mother took Ethan to release snakes in the mountains. He was bitten. God, you're impossible." Michael's pupils shrank. His body shook violently as he suddenly sat up, throwing off the blanket, and trying to swing his legs off the bed. But when he looked down and saw there was only one leg left, he froze completely. How to describe the look on his face? For words came to mind, a spectacular collapse. He stared at the stump in stunned silence, his body slack like all the strength had been drained from him. Then, after several minutes of eerie stillness, the hospital room erupted with his screams, hoarse, raw, and full of despair. My divorce case proceeded without him. Michael continued refusing to appear in court, but the evidence I'd provided was overwhelming. The judge proceeded with a default trial in his absence. In the division of assets, since he was found to be at fault, he received only 40%. Custody of both children, Ethan and Emily, naturally went to him. Grace Sanders was ordered to return all the money and property he had secretly transferred to her. According to the financial report my lawyer prepared, the house went to me. The car, his remaining investments, and the funds he'd spent on Grace went to him. Fortunately, housing prices were still low at the time, around 6,000 or 7,000 per square meter. If it had been 10 years later, when prices tripled, I would have had to pay dearly for that property. Once I finally freed myself from that wretched family, my life became light and peaceful again. I quit my job, bought a camper van, and decided to travel while I was still young. I filmed my trips and uploaded the videos online, never expecting that they'd attract thousands of followers. Soon, I was even earning money from it. So, I became a travel blogger. The next time I heard about Michael Reed, it was 2 years later, over dinner with friends. Someone at the table mentioned Michael Reed. They said that when Grace Sanders got engaged, he showed up at the venue and caused complete chaos, shattering decorations, smashing tables, and wrecking much of the hotel and wedding company's setup. Eventually, the police were called. He paid for all the damages and was detained for 15 days. After his release, he began drinking heavily every single day, destroying himself little by little until he was barely recognizable. As for Emily, she dropped out of high school before graduating. Since Michael and Grace often forgot to send her living expenses, she eventually moved in with a wealthy classmate, thinking she could secure an easy life. But she accidentally got pregnant. The school expelled her. When Michael, dragging his crippled body, went to confront the boy's family, they humiliated him, accusing Emily of selling herself. In the end, the boy's family paid $60,000 to bury the scandal. The boy went back to school as if nothing had happened, while that money bought the end of Emily's future. Hearing it, my chest tightened painfully. I couldn't help but sigh. For girls, the road is always harder to walk. Later, Grace Sanders was diagnosed again, this time with pancreatic cancer. Her fiancé broke off their engagement as soon as he found out. She tried to go back to Michael, but by then, he had vanished. No one knew where he went. Time passed quickly. Another 2 years slipped by. I no longer felt the urge to travel constantly. Instead, before housing prices skyrocketed again, I bought myself a small villa with a garden. I adopted a cat and a dog and filled the yard with flowers and greenery. One evening after dinner, I was walking my dog through the nearby park when I heard a trembling voice behind me. "Mom." I turned around. It was Ethan. He walked with a slight limp on his left leg, wearing a blue-gray work uniform with the logo Phaeton Machinery stitched over his chest pocket. His eyes were red, his face pale with emotion. I straightened my posture, then smiled gently. "I'm not your mom anymore," I said softly. "You can call me Lisa, or Aunt Lisa." He flinched, his eyes filled with tears that spilled down his cheeks. The puppy in my arms struggled and barked, trying to pull forward. I gave a helpless smile. "Snowball's too playful," I said lightly. "He probably wants to run ahead. You can come visit sometime, all right?" Then I turned and continued walking. But as I moved forward, my vision began to blur. In the hazy glow of the street lights, I seemed to see two little figures, one bright-eyed girl and one shy boy, looking up at me from years ago. The boy had asked curiously, "Who are you? Why are you here?" "I'm your mom," I had replied. Their small faces lit up with pure joy. They threw themselves into my arms, laughing and cheering. "We have a mom now. I'm going to tell everyone in kindergarten that I have a beautiful mom." I blinked, and the memory faded into the night. How did we ever end up like this? I stood quietly in the park, the street lights casting a soft golden glow over the fallen leaves. The evening breeze carried the faint scent of blooming flowers. My little dog ran ahead, then turned back to look at me, as if urging me to move forward. I smiled, peaceful, almost weightless. My life had once been swallowed by betrayal, pain, and deceit. I had lost everything: love, trust, even the best years of my youth. But through that loss, I learned how to love myself, how to let go, and how to rise again. Michael, Grace, and everyone who once hurt me, they were now nothing more than shadows in my memory. I no longer hated them. I no longer needed revenge. All I wanted was the peace I had finally earned with my own hands. I lifted my gaze to the night sky. In the silence, I could hear my heart beating, steady, strong, and free. From this moment on, I only live for myself.